What if all the history we know is just a well-told fairy tale? The official version of events can only satisfy someone who lacks critical thinking, someone unable or unwilling to question anything. For everyone else, the story is so poorly stitched together that it only causes bewilderment. Take, for example, the famous image of the Spartans. They fight in heavy metal helmets, yet wear light sandals. It looks impressive, almost like a designer's creation. But behind this beautiful image lies a paradox. Where did they even get the metal for their swords, shields, and helmets? Did they dig ore out of the ground with sticks? And what did they melt it in? To melt metal, you need a container that can withstand its temperature, a container made of another, even stronger metal. This is just one of thousands of inconsistencies, the visible tip of the iceberg. The real questions begin when we look at what surrounds us every day, the very foundation of our civilization, our cities. Historians offer us two main scenarios for the emergence of cities. The first and most popular is that a city grew out of a small village from a chaotic cluster of houses built by settlers. The second scenario is the result of mass migration. A conditional crowd of warriors, monks, or peasants in simple shoes, driven by some unknown purpose, comes from nowhere and builds a city for themselves, always complete with a massive cathedral, reaching for the sky and a magnificent theater on the main square. It's as if civilization was created solely for praying and watching plays, even though the first can be done under the open sky and the second can be skipped altogether. But if almost all ancient cities grew from villages, why don't we see this process happening now? Why don't modern villages turn into cities? Even if a settlement expands several times over, it remains just a large village. No one would think of renaming it a city. According to the logic of official history, all villages should eventually become cities. But this doesn't happen, and it never will. There is a fundamental, insurmountable difference that separates these two types of settlements. That difference is sewage. A city has it, and a village does not. And this isn't about comfort. The fact is, a sewer system is an incredibly complex engineering network that must be designed and laid before the construction of the city begins, not after. You can't just take a sprawling village with its chaotic layout and install a centralized drainage system underneath it. It is the heart and circulatory system of a city, and it is laid down at the very beginning on empty ground. Therefore, cities could only appear after the technology to create sewer networks existed. But the sewer system itself is preceded by a whole chain of things that were nearly impossible for the ancient world. It all starts with a master plan for the city drawn on paper. You can't draw such a complex project with a stick in the sand or with dye on an animal hide. It requires the highest precision, and for that, you need at least a pencil and paper. We won't even delve into the extremely complex technology of paper production. Let's just say that the manufacturing process of a simple pencil consists of 86 operations and takes 16 days, requiring many different machines. But let's assume paper and pencil were found. Then the hardest part begins. It is necessary to conduct topographic and engineering geodetic surveys to link the plan to the terrain. You need to survey the soil, drill wells, take soil samples, and study the groundwater levels. All this requires sophisticated equipment, machinery, and tools. But most importantly, it requires specialists. It requires engineers with higher education, geologists, and surveyors, not warriors and peasants in simple shoes. It turns out that even to lay the very foundation of civilization, to build the simplest city, a level of knowledge and technology was required that, according to the same official history, the people of that time simply could not have possessed. If even the basics, the infrastructure hidden beneath the ground, are so complex, then what can be said of the magnificent structures that the same people supposedly built? Let's look at what rises above these impossible foundations: the medieval castles and Gothic cathedrals. These symphonies of stone reaching for the sky are astonishing in their complexity, grace, and most importantly, their durability. They have stood for centuries, surviving wars, natural disasters, and the changing of eras as if time has no power over them. And official history tells us, without a hint of embarrassment, that these architectural masterpieces were built mainly by serfs, illiterate people working for food and the lash. Let's pause for a moment and think about this. How did people with no education and often without proper shoes manage to lay walls with perfect seamless masonry that that shows no cracks or distortions, even after 1,000 years? How did they calculate the complex vaults and arches that distribute colossal weight with surgical precision? This requires deep knowledge of mathematics, physics, and material science. And most importantly, how did they lift multi-ton stone blocks to dizzying heights with primitive wooden structures and ropes? This explanation doesn't stand up to any scrutiny and sounds like an outright mockery. Today, such work requires powerful tower cranes and complex machinery, yet we are asked to believe it was all done virtually by hand. Then we are told about the construction timelines. A cathedral built over 1, 2, or even 300 years is supposedly the norm, but even that is a gross understatement if you realistically consider the volume of work, the primitive technology of the era, and the limited number of people who could be involved in construction. After all, someone had to plow the fields to feed everyone. It becomes obvious they couldn't have built such a thing even in 1,000 years. Without electricity for light and power tools, without cranes to move heavy loads, without concrete mixers for industrial-scale mortar production, it's pure fantasy. Moreover, imagine a project that lasts for 2 centuries. The original architects and builders would be long gone. How did their descendants, without detailed blueprints and modern design systems, manage to continue the work of their great-grandfathers with perfect accuracy, not deviating from the original plan by a single millimeter? This entire picture collapses under the slightest serious examination. On one hand, we are shown brilliant structures impossible for their time. On the other, we are told fairy tales about illiterate peasants with wooden shovels. The contradiction is so blatant that it forces one to doubt the reality of the era itself. We are shown not only incredible buildings, but also artifacts from that time. But what if we take a closer look at them? Will they stand up to a simple test of durability? The doubts born from looking at impossible buildings only intensify when we move from the grand to the personal, to objects you can hold in your hands. Recently, I had the chance to visit a local history museum. In one of the halls, work was being done to replace the display cases, and a few exhibits were temporarily not behind glass, but simply lying on a table. Among them were a knight's helmet and a sword. At one point, finding myself alone in the hall, I took a risk, stepped over the barrier tape, went to the table, and picked up these items. What I felt shattered another layer of official history. These objects were as fake as the stone axes of ancient man with their perfectly drilled holes. The knight's helmet was a crudely made metal bucket with slits, weighing at least 10 to 12 kilograms, or 22 to 26 pounds. I can say with full confidence, even just wearing this bucket, keeping it on your head would be difficult. As for fighting in it, maneuvering, seeing your opponent, and breathing all at once was out of the question. Any blow to such a helmet would cause not only a concussion from the vibration, but could easily damage the cervical vertebrae. As for the sword, it turned out it had never been sharpened. Its blade was slightly rounded and was 4 to 5 millimeters thick along the entire edge. It was impossible to inflict a serious wound on anyone with such an object. At best, you could leave bruises using it like a club. This was not a combat blade, but a heavy metal blank mimicking the shape of a sword. And if we talk about the weapons displayed behind glass, they certainly look beautiful. The hilts of rapiers and sabers are covered in gold and encrusted with precious stones. Old cannons are covered in intricate patterns and filigree. But what does all this jewelry-like luxury have to do with actual warfare? Absolutely nothing. In battle, functionality, lightness, and reliability are valued infinitely more than decorative finishing. When you look at all these artifacts, you get a persistent feeling that they were made retroactively specifically for museums. There is no other way to explain their glaring absurdity and lack of functionality. The helmets, the swords, the sabers, all of it is incredibly heavy, impractical, and completely unsuitable for real combat. This leads to a thought. Did the era depicted in paintings and textbooks ever even exist? Or was it all carefully invented and then materialized through museum forgeries so that we would have something to point to and say, look, this is antiquity? When you start paying attention to such details, the world around you literally begins to fall apart. The weapons are toys. The armor is like a prop. If the buildings are impossible and the artifacts are fake, perhaps the historical events described in the chronicles are also just a fantasy. When the material evidence of eras, buildings, and artifacts crumbles, the last bastion of history remains. Written sources, the chronicles. But upon closer inspection, they turn out to be no less fantastical. You sit and read some ancient chronicle, and it describes events happening thousands of kilometers away as if the author witnessed them personally. And this was at a time when the maximum speed of travel was limited by a horse's endurance, no more than 100 kilometers a day. And that's if you even had a horse and roads. 90% of the population had neither. The wars of the past, as described in these chronicles, are strikingly different from the wars of today. In the books, everything seems surprisingly simple. Generals gather great armies and march on foot to conquer entire countries and continents. Alexander the Great decided to conquer India and simply moved his phalanx across deserts, mountains, and rivers, thousands of kilometers from home. Napoleon wanted to fight Russia and led his army on foot all the way to Moscow. But how do you supply an army of hundreds of thousands of men and tens of thousands of horses with food, water, and fodder on a months-long campaign through foreign, often hostile and devastated territory? Modern military logisticians will tell you this task is impossible even with railways, trucks, and aircraft. Yet, we are asked to believe it was done with ox-drawn carts. Even more incredible is the story of the conquistadors. A few hundred men from tiny Spain on their flimsy wooden ships sail to South America and conquer a giant continent with a population of millions. And they don't just conquer it, they build cities, and along the way, teach the entire native population to speak Spanish. Just imagine the scale of that, the resources required, and the British Empire, which colonized the vast land of India, located many thousands of miles away. It also built cities there and imposed its civilization. How much cargo, people, tools, weapons, and food had to be transported halfway around the world to achieve this? It's mind-boggling. Although it is quite boggling if it all happened only on the pages of books and the canvases of painters. It's easy to live in an illusion where there is no friction, no material resistance, and no simple human fatigue. And what can we do in our real lives with modern technology, weapons, and resources? We can't even build an exact replica of a wooden sailing ship. It turns out there are 1,000 reasons preventing it, from the lack of the right wood to the loss of processing technologies, to invade another country, subdue its people, build cities there, and force the entire population to speak a foreign language. It's laughable to even talk about. The United States, with all its military and economic power, couldn't defeat a small country like Vietnam. And how many resources and how much time does it take today to rebuild just one city, completely destroyed by war? Years, if not decades. It seems we cannot bring to life that which exists so easily and beautifully in books, paintings, and movies. The real world is different. It's rough, heavy, and unyielding. All of this creates a strange, almost schizophrenic picture. On one hand, a majestic, brilliant past with its incredible buildings, heroic deeds, and civilizing missions. On the other, our utilitarian and tasteless present, which cannot replicate even 1/100th of what our ancestors supposedly did. Why is there such a chasm between these two worlds? This chasm separating the two worlds becomes obvious if you just look around. Everything that exists in our world can be roughly divided into two parts. In the first part, you will find the beautiful creations of past eras, majestic monuments, wonderful sculptures, brilliant works of art, classical music, and literature. This category also includes highly artistic, elegant interior items and stunningly beautiful jewelry created by old masters. This world is filled with harmony, meaning, and what we call soul. In the second part, you will find everything else: utilitarian, tasteless, and often just ugly. Modern buildings devoid of grace and sophistication. Objects created by people living today where function has completely replaced aesthetics. We see it every day. Gray, soulless buildings we call palaces of culture. Standard concrete boxes we live in. Mass-produced items devoid of individuality and warmth. Why is there such an abyss between these two worlds? The most common explanation is this: people in the past knew how to make such things, but now we've forgotten how. There were some unique technologies back then which are now lost. We are told that Leonardo da Vinci could apply layers of paint just a few microns thick, creating the effect of living skin. Yet modern artists, armed with all the knowledge of chemistry and optics, cannot replicate it. But wait, how is that possible? How could humanity, after making a giant leap in science and technology, gaining access to millions of textbooks, the most complex machines and tools, and a global network of knowledge, have forgotten how to do something? This contradicts the very logic of progress. If the ancients had technologies superior to ours, we would see traces of their development. But we see the opposite. With all our immense progress in science and technology, with possibilities that are limitless compared to the past, we build concrete boxes, not Gothic cathedrals. We slap together soulless gray buildings instead of elegant palaces. We create soulless things that don't last long and end up in a landfill. The degradation in aesthetics and durability is obvious, and to blame it on lost technologies is to turn a blind eye to the truth. The contradiction is so great that it forces one to consider the most incredible possibility. What if these two worlds, the world of the elegant past and the world of the utilitarian present, are not connected by a direct line of historical development at all? What if one does not follow from the other? Perhaps the geniuses of the past were not our ancestors in the usual sense, and we are not their degraded descendants. Perhaps the very structure of time and history is not at all what we are taught. What if our world periodically resets itself like a computer being rebooted? This idea of a reboot could explain the strange chasm between the past and the present. Imagine that our world is a kind of system that periodically updates itself. At the moment of such a reboot, everything created by man, being of no true value, imperfect and temporary, simply turns to dust. And all the magnificence we attribute to our ancestors, those same cathedrals, palaces, and works of art, is a creation of a higher order made not by humans, but by the Creator himself. And with each reboot, it reappears, revived by light in its pristine beauty. It is indestructible and immortal because it doesn't belong to our perishable world. We merely find these artifacts and invent a history for them, trying to fit them into our primitive worldview. This brings us to the ultimate philosophical question. Why was this world created at all? Most people are convinced it was created for joy and happiness. But if so, then why is this happiness so elusive? Why is human history a series of suffering, wars, and injustice? Popular culture offers us a simple answer. Some evil forces are preventing our happiness. Depending on your level of interest, these could be reptilian invaders, a malevolent demiurge, an illusory matrix, the devil, the Masons, or someone else. They supposedly keep us in slavery and prevent us from enjoying life. All right, let's imagine for a second that all these evil forces are gone. We have defeated them, banished them, destroyed them, and now humanity gets everything it wants. Absolute freedom, eternal health, unlimited resources, money. What would people do with all this? The answer is obvious to anyone who knows a little about human nature. They would lounge on sofas, eat to excess, and indulge in alcohol and other substances. They would travel from resort to resort in an endless search for new sensory pleasures. They would buy everything they possibly could and drown in possessions, a complete and final degradation of the spirit. Is this what our complex and beautiful world was created for? Of course not. A place where we are tested for our strength, a place where difficult and sometimes painful trials are conducted, has a name. It's a proving ground, and our earth is not a resort or a vacation home. It's a proving ground for souls. That is why life here is so hard, and sometimes simply unbearable. We are not here to enjoy ourselves, but to learn lessons, overcome difficulties, make choices between good and evil, to grow and become stronger. I once came across a saying from a wise man that struck me deeply. True good is perceived by the majority of people as absolute evil. This makes you think, what if everything we perceive as evil, illness, hardship, injustice, is actually the greatest good for us? Perhaps these are the training machines at the proving ground, designed to make our souls stronger and purer. The term proving ground seems simple, but in the original language of this theory, the word used is polygon. What if this word, like so many others, holds the key to the entire mystery of our existence? Let's break it down. The word polygon seems to us like a simple term from geometry, but its true meaning is much deeper and more unsettling. Etymologically, it comes from two Greek words, poly, meaning many, and gonia, which translates to angle. Thus, the literal translation of the word polygon is many-angled figure. But this word is not as simple as it seems. It has different hidden meanings. And to understand them, one must explore what an angle represents in a sacred rather than a geometric sense. You can find a curious detail if you turn to the most ancient texts of humanity. In the Bible, in the Indian Vedas, in Buddhism, everywhere there are mentions of corners, and almost always they are associated with something bad, with restriction and punishment. In the Bible, the corner is directly linked to the underworld. For instance, there are phrases about sinners being led to a dark corner of hell where there is no light and no hope. Here, a corner is not just a part of space. It is a symbol of exile, a place of suffering and eternal darkness. The ancient Indian Vedas say that the god of destruction and fury, Shiva, was trapped in a deadly corner when his dance threatened to destroy the universe. Another text states he was confined in a shining corner of four sides to stop his dance of destruction. Again, a corner becomes a prison, this time for an uncontrollable and all-powerful force. In Buddhism, there is also this interesting connection. Their equivalent of hell, a world of suffering and torment, is called Naraka. If you look into ancient interpretations, you can find the claim that the word Naraka goes back to an ancient proto-language of the East, where Na means low or bottom, and Rak comes from the root Raksha, meaning corner or nook. Literally translated, Naraka is the corner below. In all these traditions, separated by thousands of years and miles, a corner is not just a geometric shape. It is a powerful symbol of isolation, limitation, fear, and punishment. Perhaps in the past, people knew far more about the hidden power of corners than we can imagine, and echoes of this knowledge have been preserved where we least expect to find them, in our modern language. According to ancient knowledge, in former times, or in the previous game if you will, there was a concept of the divine angle. Depending on the date of birth, each person was patronized by one of 124 gods, each corresponding to a specific angle from 360 degrees down to 15. A person would receive knowledge from their patron god on how to use their designated angle. They would acquire certain magical abilities that are completely inaccessible to us now. So, what path have we traveled? It all began with a simple doubt about official history, with a question about where the Spartans got their metal. This small question, like a crack in a dam, triggered a chain reaction. We saw that the very foundation of our civilization, ancient cities with their sewers, could not have been built by those credited with their construction. Then we looked up and realized that the majestic cathedrals and castles are structures impossible for their declared eras and technologies. Coming back down to Earth, we held artifacts from museums in our hands and confirmed that the weapons and armor of the past are nothing more than crude, non-functional props. We analyzed the great military conquests and realized they could only have happened on the pages of books, not in the harsh real world. This grand falsification, which is called history, serves a single purpose: to hide the truth from us about who we really are and what abilities we possess. Instead, we are fed fairy tales about our descent from apes and how we are flying through space on a rock. All this is done so that we never ask the main question and never start looking for a way out. So, what should we do with this truth? The first and most important step is to stop taking things at face value. Question everything you see and hear. Doubt the dogmas that have been drilled into you since school. Think for yourself. Discuss this theory with those who are willing to listen, because the awakening of one person can start a chain reaction. The escape from the polygon does not begin with storming its walls, but with the awakening of each of our minds.